Hello, everyone, and welcome. This week's lecture is on typography, which is one of our graphic design fundamentals. So let's get started. This is a bit of a longer one. There's a lot of information, so I will try not to nerd out too much on it, but take breaks if you need. You can always pause it and come back later. All right. So, what is topography or typography? Um, It is the style, arrangement, or appearance of typeset matter. So basically, what that means is anything that is typed or, depending on the style, handwritten is typography. No, not handwritten. Ignore that. Anything that is typed. So back in the day when the printing press was just getting started, typesetting, literally you had little blocks of type that you would put in and then roll the ink on it and then press paper to it. So that's what typesetting means. It has now come to be just like designing with type because we don't really have typesetting in use anymore. There's a couple of places where you can do that. It's kind of a niche thing now, but type is something that is super, super important because it not only is a graphic element, so it has the same rules as like point, line, plane, that kind of stuff, but it's also a means of communication. So if you are choosing an ineffective type and using it on an advertisement, your communication is not getting across like you want it to. So when it's done well, it can make your design like enhanced both visually and to portray meaning. When it's done badly, it can be a distraction. So I keep using the word type a lot. So let's look at what type is. So type is a term used for letter forms. So if you look at a keyboard, all of the letters on there, your numbers, and then any punctuation, that is type. Obviously, your function keys are not going to be type, but anything that you can hit that would make a mark on your screen is type. And we use those in combination to make words, to make sentences, and to make narratives, which narrative is like the story of a thing. So we use that to impart information visually in a way that we can like communicate with each other, right? All right. So in terms of typefaces, so in general, you probably have not heard the term typeface as much as you have heard the term font. And that is because in recent usage, font has come to you to be both. So typeface is the more accurate term because it is all of the letter forms, and then like you have a unified design behind it. Font is specific applications within that. So things like bold, italics, those kind of things, those are your fonts within a typeface. I'm not going to harp on that too much because I know that common parlance uses them interchangeably. But typeface itself is all of the letter forms unified by common characteristics and elements. So we've got some examples over here, and we're going to go into those a little bit deeper. So the next slide is we're breaking down a letter form and the typeface. It is going to be a lot of vocabulary thrown at you. You do not need to memorize it. It is in your book, which is chapter 25, but I'm going to like give you all examples for it, and then this is the part where you may need to break it up, okay? All right. So this is examples of the different parts of the anatomy of a letter form. So just like a human body, a letter form has an anatomy as well. So the big things to kind of like encapsulate it here is, we have a baseline where everything rests. We have your capital height, which is basically the high point, and we have things that sometimes go above that and sometimes go below the baseline, and we'll talk about those. And then we have your X height, which is the height of the lowercase x in the typeface, and that serves as sort of a midpoint, but it's a good point of reference. And then within that, within each letter form, there are different parts of it itself. All right, there we go. Okay, so typedecon.com is where I got these example images. I would highly recommend them. They have a glossary of all of the anatomy of a letter form terms you could ever want. So, because this is not all of them. Even though these are the ones in your book, these are the basics. If you're wanting to design a font, which is like a bucket list thing of mine, there are many, many more than this. So, I'm going to go through them with examples. And then, if you need to go back and reference them, go ahead and do that. I think I might have a slide repeated on here. No, I don't. Okay, good. All right, so apex. Apex means top or highest point. So it is the outer point where two diagonal stems or strokes meet. So we're going to go over what a stem or a stroke is later because these are alphabetical. But basically, look at your two, the lines that make up the A, the outer part of the A. Where they meet is the apex. So it is two diagonals where they meet. An arm is it's a projecting stem or stroke, usually pointed upward. So think of things like the top of your K, the V, to a lesser extent, the like U, the right side of the U. But it is something that is horizontal or up pointing, but it is not enclosed, right? So like the B, that is not an arm because it's enclosed. Okay, so an ascender, so ascender, which above, right? Ascender and descender are both lowercase only, because if your capitals, everything is set by the cap height. So an ascender is something, if you have a lowercase letter, like a stem or stroke that goes above the X height. So, and in some cases above the cap height as well. So I'm going to hop back over to the other one. But look at this H here. And then the F, that top of that F would be an ascender. Oh, that's another F. The B there. So your B's, your D's, your T's, those are all going to be ascenders. Baseline, that is just what it sounds like. It is the base from which the bottom characters sit, right? So all of your bottom characters, if you imagine them sitting on a line or like a tabletop, that is your baseline. If they go below that, then you have what's called a descender, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So a bowl is a curved stem or stroke that encloses a counter. So things like your B's, your P's, your Q's, if they're both upper and lowercase, they all have a bowl. It is basically, if you took it apart, you would have, your initial stem, and then you would have the bowl, and the bowl is the rounded part. Bracket, it may be hard to see on here, but in serif fonts, so serifs have these little extending tiny strokes on them. And some serifs have a slight curve between the serif and your stem. So that's what that is. And then if you need to bring up the slides, it's bigger on there. So cap height, that is the distance from your baseline to the top of a capital letter. And then we also have some measurements thrown in here. So Cicero is so in terms of font, you have a couple of units of measurements. You have a pica, you have a point, and you have a Cicero. So a Cicero is mostly used in Europe. It is equivalent in Britain and in America to a pica or a pica. Never got clarification as to which is which. If you were to take out a ruler and measure it, it would be 4.155 millimeters. A counter is the area enclosed by a bowl or a crossbar. So in our examples over here on the right, in our A, this top little triangle right here would be a counter. In our B, the area enclosed by that B bowl is a counter. In our Q's, that area is a counter. Okay. Crossbar. Crossbars are horizontal elements. Anything I have in here that's got like in the parentheses, those are examples of it for you. So arm with a K, a cinder with a B. So crossbar is a horizontal element connecting or crossing stems, right? So the things like in your capital H, the line that goes across, that touches the left and right stems, that's a crossbar. In your capital A, that's a crossbar. In your T's, that's a crossbar. It's just like literally a bar that crosses, right? A descender is a same thing. It's a lowercase character. It's the part of it that goes below the baseline. So in your lowercase characters, these are going to usually be your G's, your Y's, J's are normally descenders as well. But anything that goes below that base. An ear. So an ear is like literally only used in two cases. It's if you have a G or an R, and it is that little funky kind of like if you took a quotation mark and turned it on its side, that's an ear. It's just the little thing projecting out of a G or an R. A lot of sans serif fonts don't have them. And then a joint is the angle where two strokes meet or intersect. So let me hop back over to our example here. Okay, so the angle where two meet, so the like top of the M here, the angle within it. So if you think back to math, not the like actual thing itself, but the angle of that is your joint. Okay. A ligature. So ligatures are usually only used in serif and script fonts. If you think about cursive, the ligature is the thing that connects the two characters together. This is a really bizarre example. Here's the S and the T, but think more cursive. So like when you're connecting the two letters together, you're connecting them with a ligature. The letters, once they're connected, are considered tied or ligature characters. A link is literally only used in a G. It is the stem or stroke. I'm using the term stem and stroke interchangeably. It's just basically the difference between a serif and a sans serif. It connects the bowl and the loop of the G. So the bowl is that like top part, loop is the bottom part of the G. only when the G is entirely closed. So in our example font here, they have a G where this bottom part right here is closed. That's a loop. If we go back to our example, this does not have a loop. It is not enclosed. It has a bowl and it has a stem, but it doesn't have a loop. Okay. Pica is our other unit of measurement. It is equal to 12 points. So, oh, I have a typo in here. Oop. Okay. I'll fix that before I post it. And then, so 12 points equal to 1 pica. If you'll notice in most, like, word processing software, like 12 is your default, and that's because of the picas. And then if you have 6 of them, it is equal to 1 inch. So it is basically 1/16 of an inch, right? And then points are the smallest you can go, like unit of measurement of type. 1 point is 1/72 of an inch. So 1 point type is incredibly tiny. In general, when you're designing, the smallest point type you want to go is 8. And that is only if you are not, like, designing for people over, you know, I don't know, I'm in my 30s and my R's are already bad. So just keep in mind the size of the type when you're designing stuff. Smaller, you can fit more on there, but it doesn't necessarily mean better. And 1 point is equal to 1/72. So you could math that out if you wanted to. If 6 picas is an, yeah. All right. So we have 2 more of these. So now we're getting to a serif versus sans serif. So a serif is the little tiny, it's the beginning or end of a stroke, of a stem, of an arm, of a leg, of a tail. So basically any letter form you have that has the little, like, things sticking off of it, those are serifs, right? Pardon me. So in this, we have our serifs on our H. So we have the 2 coming off of these legs. We have the 1 coming off of the stroke there. Same thing in the S, the little, like, thingies coming off of there. And then you'll notice all of these, if you look at them really, really, really closely, they have that lovely little bracket in them. You can really see it in the top of the H and top of the end there. So like a bracket and a serif go together. Serifs are usually at a right angle or an oblique angle. Oblique meaning slightly tilted. Okay. A shoulder. So hairline is not something we're going to discuss here because it's only used in, like, very, like, scripty or calligraphy fonts. But the shoulder is basically the curved portion of the stroke connecting to vertical strokes, right? So in things like your N, your H's, the R, those are all shoulders. Think about your shoulders. They are kind of curved in that same way that the top of the N and the top of the H's are, right? Spine is another one that you can think of in terms of, like, human anatomy as well. So our spine has 2 curves in it. We have our thoracic and then our lumbar curve, just like the spine in an S. The spine in an S is that, like, diagonal, like the main curved part of the S. Okay? A spur is a it is so hard to see on this one here, but on this capital G, there is the tiniest little triangle projection on it. It is so tiny. But it spurs the tiniest little projection off of a stroke, right? Usually seen in like bottoms of T's, the bottoms of G's, the bottoms of B's. Stem and stroke. So these are the terms that I've been using interchangeably. So, and I apologize, it's not sans serif versus serif, it's curved versus straight. So a stem or a stroke, if you've taken the Illustrator class, it's the exact same kind of thing. It is the principal vertical or oblique. So I want you to think of vertical like your normal fonts, and then oblique like your italic font. So obliques just kind of lean a little bit. But they are the principal parts of a character. So like in our H's, those vertical lines are your stems. And then in curved characters, they're just called strokes. So like non-curved characters, your A's, your M's, if they're capital M's, your V's, those all use stems. Strokes, think of them more fluid, they are curved. Stress, those are also called axes, so axes or axis. Basically, if you were to take a line and chop it down the center-ish of your letter, that is your stress or your axis. So if you're writing these out by hand of like calligraphy, this is like where the thin starts going to the thick, or the thick starts going into the thin. But it's basically like if it were resting on the baseline as a physical thing, where would its center be? Some of them have vertical, and some of them have oblique, so leaning. Just depends on the letter. Okay. And then this is our last one. Yay! A swash, which is a hilarious term. Makes me think of pirates. It is it's basically like a little flourish in there. So a little extra bit of style. It's added to like a stem or a stroke or a terminal, which is like an ending of a thing. It's added to that to add a flourish to it. A lot of your older like script fonts have those. A tail is different than a descender because a tail can be on capital letters. So think of a tail like a descender for capitals. It's just a short little stroke or a stem that projects out and either sits on or extends past the baseline. So your capital Q here has a tail on it. I'm trying to rack my brain to think of it. Sometimes, depending on the typeface, like the capital X's sometimes have a little bit of a tail. Terminal or finial. Finial is also a term for the little bits on a staircase, and I'm assuming they come from the same kind of place. It's the ending part of a stroke or a stem that doesn't end in a serif. So in our examples here, that lowercase t, that little bit at the end is your terminal, because it doesn't end in a serif, but it does still end the stroke. Vertex. Oh man, I have another typo. Dang it. Killing me, Smalls. Alright, I'll fix that one as well. A vertex, another math term, It is the angle at a bottom of a character where the left and right meets. So where we had with our A, we had an apex where the like top met, and we had a joint, which could be anywhere. The term for a specific one at the bottom is a vertex. So your V's, your W's, capital M's have them on the like inner part of the M. So you know where it goes up and then down, where the two down strokes meet. That is your vertex. And then finally, your X height is the distance from the baseline to the top of a lowercase x. So now if we go back to our examples here, they should look a little bit less like a foreign language, right? So we've got, you can kind of pick things apart here. So we've got our A, we've got the cap height line of it, we've got our X height here, and then our baseline. On our legs, because they're not pointing up, that would be arms, we've got our serifs on those. Where the two meet, that is our apex. And then we have a crossbar going across. You'll notice that the crossbar is not at the X height. Some fonts they are. And then, you know, if we look at the F, we have a bracket right here. This is not a curved bracket, it's just a bracket. We have our cinder coming up. We have a crossbar here. And then this is the vertex that I was talking about with the M. So it is where those two legs meet. And then you could call these apexes. All three are joints. And then we've got that. We've got our descender on our G, but remember we don't have a loop because it's not enclosed. We have our bowl with our counter. Counter always goes in a bowl. I know in your kitchen you put a bowl on a counter, but in typography you put a counter in a bowl. Ear, you'll notice it's just the one side off versus both. This is just an example of a stem. You got your leg. So yeah, this should hopefully give you like more of an idea of what's going on with a font. Sorry. See, I do it too with a typeface. A lot more like goes into designing one. There's a lot more work with like angles and circles and, you know, spacing and planning that stuff out. But now if somebody asked you to kind of like tease apart one, you could do it. So within typefaces / fonts, we have different variations. So there's 6 that are pretty consistent no matter which one you look at. So it's going to be the same in Arial versus, Garamond versus Helvetica. They're all going to have these 6 kind of variations in it. So the first one is case, which if you think about it, you have an uppercase and a lowercase. So your lowercase is lowercase, your uppercase is all your capitals. So your weight is like you can think of fonts in how heavy or how light they are. And the way that they're heavy or light is how thick the strokes are. So a bold font or a bolder font is going to have thicker strokes or stems than a like a lighter font, right? So contrast is the difference of degree of weight change. So like how much of a difference is there between the thinnest of strokes and the widest of strokes. So the more difference there is, the higher contrast. The posture, so whether or not it is upright, so straight up and down vertical, those are what is called Roman, and that does come from the ancient civilization. They had a very specific kind of typeface that they used that was mostly uprights. So vertical is Roman, and then anything slanted or angled is going to be italic. So whereas contrast is the difference between like the thinnest stroke and the widest stroke, the width is the difference between the width of a letter form to the height of a letter form. So if you have a extremely small width to a large height, that is going to be a narrow font. If you have an extremely wide font to wide character to tall, it is going to be a wide or extra wide font. So if you look in your softwares and you see these variations, that's where these come from. And then the style is serif versus sans serif. So serifs just have the little serifs poking off, right? So we're going to look at some of these classifications of them to give you more of an idea of how these things actually come into play. All right. So let's look at some classifications here. So they're separated into, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes. So you have 6 different characteristics, and now you also have 6 different classifications. And these are pretty wide categories, but these are the like accepted classifications, right? All right. So, old style. So these are the oldest fonts, right? Garamond comes from like the 1500s. Gaudi or Goody comes from like 16 or 17. Your book has all the dates, but these are old. These came from the days when like we were just getting printing presses as a thing. So, old style fonts like Garamond, Bimbe, Gaudi or Goody. I've never heard it said out loud. There you go. These are based on Roman proportions, so based on Roman carvings. If you'll notice, there is not a strong contrast. So if you remember, contrast is the degree of weight change. So let's see here. Our X has a pretty good like thin stroke here. Sorry, stem. It's not curved. Thin stem versus a wide stem. All of the wide stems are the same, but the difference between the thinnest and the largest is not like that much. All of the stresses are oblique, so remember that stress is the same word as axis. So all of these stresses or like center axes of our letters are tilted slightly. So to tell that, you can look at where the thin meets the thick. So in the O is the easiest one to tell. So if you drew a line from here to here, it would be tilted. Same thing with the P and the Q, right? It has a smaller X height. So if you look at the cap height versus the X height, if you were to compare the two, the X height is very small. And the terminals are all pear-shaped. So if you kind of zoom in here, you can see that on our terminals, so our Y, you would have to really zoom in to see it on our T. Those are all pear-shaped. The ear is pear-shaped as well on our R's and G's. And then the lowercase counters, so the spaces within our bolds here, so our O, our P, our Q, our A, you can see it best in the A and the E here. Those are all small in an old style font. Okay, so let's look at our next one. Whoa. Oh, sorry. If you click on them, it goes to the information about the font. Okay. Transitional. These were created in the transition between modern and old style. So they are marked by a couple of things. It's Baskerville Bell, Perpetua. Those are all transitional fonts. You'll notice that they have a greater contrast between the old style. So the X's are a really easy one to look at for, it doesn't have the X here. Let's see. Oh, no, there is an X. So there is a greater contrast. So the wides are wider than the narrows. Like, there's a greater difference between those. The serifs in here are sharper. You can see that instead of being like pear-shaped, rounded at the end, all of the serifs are pointed. The X heights are larger. So if you compared the X height to the cap height of the transitional versus the old style, the X heights are going to be higher. And then instead of the stresses being oblique, they're almost vertical in this. So if you looked at the angle of the old style, it was pretty clearly diagonal of the axis of the stress. Versus here, we've got a almost vertical. There might be a slight obliqueness to it, but if we look at that thin point of the O, it is almost vertical. The next one is modern. So I've got two examples on here. We're still in our serif fonts here, but these are things like Bodoni, Didot, and Melior. A lot of French ones. Moliere is one too. These ones have the biggest contrast. So look at the in here. Look how thin that stem is versus this leg, right? That is thin to whoa thick. Holy cow thick. Even on, so ignore the serifs, but like even on these where you have your thins, they're still like crazy much like contrast between them. The serifs on here are extremely thin. So like, I'm going to hop back up to that one. The serifs on this, they are bracketed and they're thicker. They're sharper, but they're thicker. If we go back to the very original ones, we have some very, very thick serifs here that are extremely bracketed and very curved. So thicker, thinner, thinnest yet, right? And then in this one, the stress is basically vertical. So in our O's there, that is basically a vertical axis on those. So we're moving towards modernity. All right, and then we hop into our sans serifs. So these are the ones that you see more often. Those are the ones that are on our keyboards everywhere. These are the ones that are on our phones. They are the slicker ones, I guess. Sleeker. Futura, Meta, and Universe are all sans serifs. Basically just means no serif. Sans in French is none, or without. So no serifs. There is basically no variation in your stroke weight or your stem weight. So if we look at our O's, even the curved parts are as thick as the rest of it. So like with an even stroke weight like that, it has no contrast, right? Because they're even. Stresses are vertical, so our axes are vertical. So no serifs, no contrast, vertical stresses. And then our next one is our slab serif, which are the more modern serifs. So these ones I find interesting because they're like a nice little mix of the sans and the serifs. Because they have the serifs, but the stroke weight or the stem weight are even. So it's uniform throughout. So, you know, we have our O's, but there's no thin versus thick here. And the serifs are the same weight as the rest of the line. So we just have an angle there. We don't have a curved bracket. And then by this point, we have all just decided as a society that we're doing vertical stems. So that axis is straight up and down. These are ones like Clarendon, Memphis, and Stymie. And then our last one, which is everybody's favorite when they first start graphic design, is going to be our graphic fonts. So these are all your script fonts, which are basically our calligraphy fonts. They look kind of like somebody actually writing. Brush, our decorative fonts, which is what this is here. This is a Wingdings. It was just made up completely of icons. And then your black letter fonts. So basically anything that doesn't fit into the above 5 goes into graphic. There's not a uniform delineator of what is a graphic font. It is unique in appearance. In general, it has a lot of graphic information being relayed in there, especially in Wingdings. That's why I chose it. Like, you can obviously tell what icon is representing, right? The interesting thing about graphic fonts is that in general they tend to have either like explicit, so obvious, or implied meanings. So by using a graphic font, you are either obviously or implying a certain thing with it. So think about, you know, a flyer that you would see with a like a Comic Sans, well, no, that one's technically a sans serif. Like a really curly Q kind of scripty font versus, you know, a sans serif versus a serif. Or which fonts are usually used on like super official things like certificates or your diplomas or like super fancy invitation. So there is a meaning, whether or not you mean to imply it, between like fonts when they're implying information. Okay, so now that we've gotten all of the baseline for how to build a typeface, let's talk about actually using them in our designs, right? So there are some things to consider. Optical issues. So depending on your typeface, the perceived size of your letter forms are going to differ. Okay, so on the right here, I have the capital A's and the lowercase a's. They are both at 60 point font. So, and then one is Arial and one is Times New Roman. So they're both at 60, but they are not perceived as the same size. I don't know if you like took a ruler to it. No, if you take a ruler to it, maybe not on the lowercase a's. But the uppercase, the cap heights have the same. Because different type things have different X heights and cap heights and different like relationships between them. So a sans serif usually has a larger relationship between a X height and cap height. So your X height is normally much bigger, right? Serifs usually have a small, so think of like the relationship not as a like ratio, but think of it as, you know, the X height is smaller in serifs versus the X height in sans serif. Why this is important is for readability and accessibility. So if I were to take both of these and put them into 12-point font or 8-point font, one of them would be extremely more readable than the other. So we want, especially depending on our use case, we want our fonts to be readable as possible, because if people are trying to figure out what you are actually saying because they can't read the writing, they are not taking away the message that you are wanting to portray. So always think about that. This is also true within things like the weight of your font and like the kerning and leading of or leading of your font. So leading is the space between letters. When they had typesetting machines, they would literally have pieces of lead that they would put in between the letters to space them. So the higher leading you have, the more space in between letters. Smaller is smaller, so you don't want things too bunched up or too far apart. And then your kerning is your space between words. Let's see here. Next, the thing to consider is our alignment. I don't know if y'all are seeing it, but the different alignments here make me look like it's slightly tilted, which is an interesting visual thing that's happening. So we have our alignments. We have flush left, so all of the words begin on the same like point on the left edge. That's what we're used to. You indent, you bring in some space between that. Flush right, same thing on the other side. All of the words begin at the same point on the right vertical edge. Center, they all share the same center axis. So like going out from the center. And then justified, every line is the same length. It aligns on the left and right edges. So there's also like justify left, justify right, and justify center. I have the bottom, so top paragraph is justify left, or sorry, flush left. Next one is flush right. Next one is center. Bottom one is justify. It's technically justify left. So it stretches everything to the left and right, and then if it can't, on that last line, it's going to justify it to the left. With justified, the thing that you need to be aware of is that it is going to change the spacing between words to make it fit those left and right edges. So if you look at the ones above it, they have equal space in between each word, right? Equal space in between each word, equal space in between each letter. In the justified here, you can see the like not super extreme, but there is a variation between the spaces between words. So like space on the first line, pretty normal. Space on the second line, whoa, that's a big space. Space on the like third and fourth, there's more words, so it's a more reasonable space. So why would you use justified versus non-justified? If you are using flush left or flush right, you have what can, definitely on center, you have what are called rags. So those are just like the little ragged edges of your text. So the fact that it's not flush on both sides, you've got rags. So if you're wanting it to seem extremely uniform, that's when you would use justified. And then the last thing I want to talk to you about is something called typographic color. This is not the color of your type. It's not, right? I apologize. I've been talking for a while. I had to take a drink. So you can add color to your type. That is not typographic color. Type has its own like rhythmic, textural, and spatial characteristics. So every typeface has its own. Within those, a typographic color is the variations that you do in things like your spacing. So spacing between lines, your kerning between words, your leading between letters, your weight, which remember is your thickness, your mass, which think of mass more like contrast, but it's like a holistic weight, and texture. So I would consider like things like serif versus sans serif to be like a textural thing. So by varying those, by like mixing up your typographic color on a design, you can either highlight information, or you can help provide clarity. You can draw the eye to certain points. That's what typographic color is those variations within your design of the typeface itself, like how you mess with that to highlight or non-highlight or certain things. So like this example here, you can't see what the text is saying, but you can see the typographic color of it. You can see how they've messed with like the spacing and the weight here. The weight is extreme on this one, so that's probably going to be something like a heading. Like think about what websites you see now. We like to be able to split out information into nice little digestible chunks, and typographic color helps with that by making our headings usually weightier, so like a bold, larger, sometimes even adjusting the spacing. We help break that information up. So that is all I have on typography here. I have a TED Talk from a really cool creator, a typographer, on our resources for the week. Make sure if you have any questions, let me know. Have a great week. Bye.